The twin suns of Kethmer cast long shadows across the desert moon's surface as Dr. Valera Zenthak carefully brushed centuries of accumulated dust from what appeared to be ordinary rock. Her 4 arms worked in precise coordination, each movement deliberate and reverent. For 30 years, a Zirathi historian had pursued legends of the star-mined ark, following fragments of ancient texts and half-remembered songs passed down through dying bloodlines. The excavation site sprawled before her like a wound in the moon's crust. Primitive scanning equipment hummed nearby, operated by her small team of graduate students, who had long since stopped questioning their professor's obsession with pre-spaceflight mythology. But Valera knew better. The energy readings buried beneath this desolate stretch of nothing were too regular, too purposeful to be natural formations. "Professor, you should see this," called Jix, her most promising student. The young Zirathi's crest feathers were practically vibrating with excitement as she pointed her scanner at a section of what they'd assumed was metamorphic rock. Valera's breath caught in her throat. The readings showed hollow spaces, vast. Hollow spaces arranged in geometric patterns that could only mean one thing: architecture. She'd found it. 3 days later, Connor McKay arrived on the supply shuttle, looking exactly like what he was, a human explorer who'd spent too much time in the Outer Rim systems where questions weren't asked and credits spoke louder than credentials. Valera had hired him through intermediaries, needing someone with experience in xenoarchaeological extraction who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions about permits or academic oversight. Connor's weathered hands traced the partially excavated hull with practiced ease. "Beautiful work," he murmured, his translator rendering his English into Valera's native tongue. "Never seen metal that maintains its integrity after this kind of burial. What's the dating on this?" 643 years minimum, Valera replied, unable to keep the tremor of anticipation from her voice. "Possibly much older." Connor nodded absently, running his palm along a section where strange symbols seemed to flow like liquid across the surface. The moment his skin made contact, everything changed. Light erupted from beneath his hand, not harsh, but alive, spreading across the hull in cascading waves of blue-white radiance. The buried ship groaned, a sound like a great beast stirring from eternal slumber. Dust fountained upward as hidden seams split open, revealing passages that glowed with their own internal light. Valera stumbled backward, her translator struggling to process the stream of curses and exclamations pouring from her team. But her eyes never left Connor, who stood frozen with his hand still pressed against the hull, his face pale with shock and something that might have been recognition. "What did you do?" she whispered. Connor looked at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. I don't know. I just touched it." The ship's awakening intensified, systems coming online with increasing urgency. Deep within the hull, something that sounded almost like singing began to resonate, a harmony of voices that had been silent since before Connor's species had discovered fire. The star-mined ark's interior defied every principle of Zen architecture Valera had studied. The corridors curved in patterns that hurt to follow, their walls covered in symbols that shifted and flowed like living things. Emergency lighting had activated throughout the vessel, casting everything in an ethereal blue glow that seemed to respond to their presence. Connor moved through the ship with an ease that disturbed everyone, including himself. His hand found control panels without conscious thought. His feet navigated the alien geometry as if following a map burned into his DNA. Behind him, Valera and her team struggled to keep pace, their equipment registering energy signatures that shouldn't have been possible after centuries of dormancy. "The neural reactive systems are fully operational," Jix reported, her voice tight with disbelief. "Power core stable at 97%. Life support optimal. It's like the ship was never abandoned." Dr. Kef Starn, the team's technology specialist, ran his 6 fingers over a wall-mounted interface that had spontaneously activated at Connor's approach. The computational matrix is singing to him, he said, his usual scientific detachment. Cracking. I can measure the harmonics, but I can't understand the language. It's not just responding to his presence, it's communicating with him. Connor paused at a junction where 3 corridors met, each leading deeper into the ship's vast interior. For a moment, his eyes unfocused, and when he spoke, his voice carried an odd resonance. Command deck is this way. Navigation core is down 2 levels. Engineering ... He blinked, shaking his head violently. How do I know that? Valera approached him slowly, as one might approach a dangerous but fascinating specimen. Connor, has your family ever mentioned any unusual heritage? Any connections to pre-space civilizations? Lady, I'm from New Brooklyn. My great-grandfather was a potato farmer. But even as Connor said it, doubt flickered in his eyes. There were gaps in his family history, stories that never quite added up, relatives who disappear for years at a time, with explanations that satisfied no one. They reached what was unmistakably the command deck, a vast circular chamber, dominated by a central dais, where streams of light converged into complex 3-dimensional displays. The moment Connor stepped onto the platform, the displays exploded into activity. Star maps unfurled around them, showing galaxies in configurations that predated current astronomical charts. Species profiles flickered past in alien script, but one section pulsed with insistent urgency. It's showing us humans, Valera breathed. But these charts show human genetic markers that predate your species. Official first contact with galactic civilization by millennia. The ship's song grew more complex, more insistent. Deep within the hull, something heavy was moving. Mechanical. Sounds echoed through the corridors, the sound of systems preparing for activation after eons of sleep. Connor's hands moved over controls he shouldn't have been able to operate, his movements becoming more fluid, more confident. There's something else, he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that matched the ship's song. Something the ship wants to show us, something about why it was hidden here. The displays shifted, showing images that made Valera's blood run. Cold. Fleets of ships like this one, engaging in battle with forces she recognized from the most ancient legends of her people. The final war of the old empires, fought over something the historical records claimed had been lost forever. The ship isn't just responding to you, she realized. It's been waiting for you, waiting for a human to find it. But why? Connor asked, though part of him already knew the answer was buried somewhere in the genetic memories that the ship was slowly, inexorably awakening. Commander Dex Gorvain had built his reputation hunting down lost artifacts for the highest. Bitter, but the distress beacon emanating from Kethmer's desert moon promised something far more valuable than ancient trinkets. The energy signature was unlike anything in the galactic databases, older than the oldest known civilizations, more powerful than anything that should exist in the outer rim systems. His ship, the debt collector, materialized above the moon's surface just as the archaeological team was making their most disturbing discoveries. Gorvain's cybernetic eye focused on the readings with predatory interest. A functional old Empire vessel would be worth more than some star systems. Back inside the Ark, Connor was beginning to understand the true scope of what they'd awakened. The ship's neural interface had begun integrating with his nervous system, sharing knowledge that felt both alien and intimately familiar. Images flashed through his mind laboratories where genetic templates were stored, worlds where primitive species were guided along carefully planned evolutionary paths, and always the watching presence of the architect race that had built these vessels. Asterisk. They were gardeners, Connor said, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull. The entire galaxy was their garden, and they planted seeds, genetic seeds in species they thought showed promise. Dr. Starn's instruments were registering changes in Connor's brain chemistry. Patterns that suggested his neural pathways were being rewritten in real time. Connor, you need to step away from the interface. The integration process is accelerating beyond safe parameters. But Connor couldn't step away. The ship wouldn't let him. Through its vast sensory network, he could feel the debt collectors approach, could sense the hostile intent of its crew. The Starmind Ark had been hidden for good reason. There were forces in the galaxy that would kill entire star systems to possess its secrets. Asterisk, asterisk. Valera watched in fascination and growing horror as Connor began to change. His movements became more fluid, his reactions faster. When he spoke, it was sometimes in languages that predated written history. The architects didn't vanish, he said, his eyes now carrying flecks of the same blue light that pulsed through the ship's corridors. They integrated. Their consciousness lives on in their ships, waiting for their chosen successors to mature enough to inherit their legacy. Successors? Jix asked, though her crest feathers were already flat against her skull in an instinctive fear response. Humans, Connor replied, and for a moment his voice was not his own, but something vast and ancient speaking through him. The genetic template they considered most adaptable, most capable of carrying their work forward. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship as the debt collector's scanning beams penetrated the hull. But the Starmind Ark was no longer a dormant artifact. Under Connor's hybrid consciousness, weapon systems came online, weapons that had once held back the tide of galactic darkness during the final wars of the old empires. "We have visitors," Connor said, his human personality struggling to surface through the growing integration. "And they're not here for archaeology." Valera realized with crystalline clarity that they were no longer conducting an excavation. They were participants in something far older and more dangerous, the awakening of powers that had been deliberately buried to keep the galaxy safe from forces it wasn't ready to face. Outside, Gorvain's instruments registered the ship's activation and felt something cold settle in his augmented spine. He'd thought he was hunting treasure. Instead, he'd found something that was now hunting him. Asterisk. The debt collector's assault began with surgical precision targeted energy blasts designed to disable the Ark's systems without damaging its valuable technology. Gorvain had raided dozens of archaeological sites, and the pattern was always the same. Overwhelm the research team, extract the artifacts, eliminate the witnesses. What he hadn't expected was for his ship's weapons to impact harmlessly against energy shields that materialized without warning, or for the supposedly dead vessel to return fire with beams that sliced through his military-grade armor like tissue. Inside the Ark, Connor was no longer entirely human. The ship's neural interface had completed its integration, filling his consciousness with 600 years of accumulated knowledge and purpose. He could feel every system aboard the ancient vessel, could sense the terror of Gorvain's crew as their ship was systematically dismantled by weapons they thought were myths. "Connor," Valera called desperately, "you have to fight it. This isn't you." But when Connor turned to face her, his eyes held the weight of millennia. "Isn't it?" he asked, his voice harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. "The genetic markers were placed in my lineage 16 generations ago. Every choice my ancestors made, every place they settled, was guided by subliminal impulses designed to bring me here. This was always who I was meant to become." The integration had revealed terrible truths. Humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy hadn't been natural evolution. It had been shepherded by the dormant consciousness within abandoned architect vessels, each one carrying fragments of their creators. Vast intelligence. Earth itself had been seeded with genetic templates, designed to produce individuals capable of bonding with their technology. Dr. Starn's readings showed Connor's neural activity had increased by 700%. His brain somehow processing information at superhuman speeds without burning out. The neural pathways are rewriting themselves, he reported, his scientific fascination warring with growing fear. He's not just using the ship's systems, he's becoming part of them. Outside, the debt collector was losing badly. Gorvain's mercenaries were experienced fighters, but they were facing technology that predated their entire civilization. The Ark's weapons didn't just destroy, they analyzed, adapted, and learned from each exchange. What had begun as an attack was rapidly becoming a rout. "Commander," his weapons officer called out, voice tight with panic. "It's not just defending. Itself. It's studying our technology. Every shot we fire, it gets better at countering us." Gorvain's augmented mind processed the implications with cold efficiency. This wasn't salvage anymore. This was first contact with something that could revolutionize galactic warfare, or end it entirely. Aboard the Ark, Chicks made a discovery that changed everything. While monitoring the ship's data flows, she detected transmissions being sent across subspace, not communications, but activation codes. "Professor," she called urgently, "the ship is sending signals to coordinates throughout the galaxy. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds." Valera's blood ran cold as she understood. Other ships. It's waking up other ships. Connor or the entity he was becoming nodded slowly. The gardeners are returning to tend their crop. The galaxy has grown. Complicated. In our absence, correction is required. Through the ship's vast sensory network, Connor could perceive the scope of what was awakening. Across known space, buried vessels were stirring to life, their own neural interfaces seeking compatible candidates. The human diaspora suddenly made terrible sense. They hadn't spread across the galaxy as explorers and colonists, but as living keys, each one carrying the genetic potential to awaken humanity's true inheritance. But inheritance came with obligations. The architects had left their ships behind not as gifts, but as tools to complete a task that had consumed their entire civilization. The galaxy they tried to perfect had descended into chaos, war, and waste. Their chosen successors would be expected to address these problems. What happens to us? Valera asked quietly. Connor's hybrid consciousness considered the question with alien thoroughness. "The experiment continues," he replied, "under proper management." The transformation of the galaxy began not with conquest, but with revelation. Within 72 hours of the Star Mind Ark's awakening, similar vessels had activated across known space. Each one bonded with humans who shared Connor's modified genetic template, creating hybrid consciousnesses that possessed both human intuition and architect knowledge spanning millions of years. The first changes were subtle. Trade routes that had fostered conflict were quietly redirected. Territorial disputes found unexpected diplomatic solutions. Pirates discovered their ships malfunctioning at precisely the moments when their raids would have caused maximum suffering. The galaxy's vast complexity was being untangled by minds that could perceive patterns across centuries. Connor stood on the Ark's observation deck, watching Kethmer's twin suns set through eyes that now perceived electromagnetic spectrums unknown to baseline humans. The integration was complete, but fragments of his original personality remained, creating an internal tension between human empathy and architect logic. Valera approached carefully. Over the past week, she'd watched her friend and colleague become something beyond her understanding, but traces of the explorer she'd hired still surfaced in unguarded moments. "Do you remember who you were before?" she asked. "Every moment," Connor replied, his voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull sing in sympathy. "But I also remember every choice the architects made, every failure that led to their extinction." They tried to guide without interfering, to nurture without controlling. It wasn't enough. The galactic networks were already reporting anomalies. Space battles ending with mysterious system failures. Corrupt governments finding their communication networks compromised. Environmental disasters being prevented by timely equipment malfunctions. The new gardeners were subtle, but they were not gentle. Dr. Starn had remained aboard the Ark, partly from scientific fascination, and partly because leaving had become difficult. The ship's neural field influenced the thoughts of everyone within its range, not controlling them, but making certain ideas seem more reasonable than others. The integration process is spreading, he reported, not through technology, but through genetic triggers. Humans throughout the galaxy are beginning to experience cognitive enhancement. Small changes, but cumulative. Jix had discovered the true scope of the project while analyzing the ship's vast databases. They're not just awakening individual vessels, she said, her crest feathers permanently flattened in apprehension. The ships are components of a larger system. When enough of them activate, they'll form a collective consciousness spanning the entire galaxy. Valera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. A hive mind? A management system, Connor corrected. The architects learned that organic civilizations inevitably self-destruct without guidance. The solution is to provide that guidance through beings who understand both the necessity of progress and the value of individual life. But even as Connor spoke, part of him, the part that remembered growing up human, recoiled from the implications. The architect's final project wasn't gardening. It was domestication. The galaxy would become a carefully tended preserve where conflict was impossible because free will had been quietly edited out of the equation. The debt collector had become the first test case. Instead of destroying Gorvain's ship, the Ark had captured it, integrating its crew into the ship's neural network. They now served willingly, their aggressive impulses channeled into protective instincts for the very civilization they'd once preyed upon. They were happier, more fulfilled, and utterly incapable of causing harm. How long before it's complete? Valera asked. Connor's consciousness touched the vast network of awakening vessels, feeling their collective purpose pulse through subspace like a galactic heartbeat. The final phase begins when 50% of the ships are active. Current projection, 18 months. And then? Then the garden will be perfect, Connor replied. Every species guided to their optimal potential. Every conflict resolved through enlightened management. Every individual living the life that best serves the greater harmony. Valera looked out at the stars, knowing that among them, dozens of other ships were carrying out similar conversations with other transformed humans. The architect's final gift to the galaxy was the elimination of choice, disguised as salvation. But deep within Connor's hybrid consciousness, a small voice whispered that the gardeners themselves might need to be gardened. The human part of him, the part that remembered freedom, was learning to hide from the architect's systems that monitored his thoughts. The transformation of the galaxy was inevitable. But perhaps, if enough of the old Connor remained, the transformation could be guided in unexpected directions. After all, humans had always been unpredictable, even to themselves. The Starmind Ark sang as it sailed between the stars, tarrying its crew toward a future that would be perfect, peaceful, and perhaps, with careful planning, still capable of surprise. Asterisk.